Okay, we are officially at 8:30. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. We had technical problems today. We blew the fuse, so we lost power. So we're actually going to have to work on our own voice power and our own car power batteries to get this going. But this has been a pretty eventful thing. Thanks for coming out and making it such a success. I hope you guys enjoyed all the food. Thank you guys. You know, it's always funny. When we lost the power, I said, lack of power is our dilemma. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous if you lack power, right? Anyway, Nick's going to come up here and start this. Bill's going to talk. He's going to give us the best he's got out of Florida. He says he's got a lot of good stuff. I don't believe him. Let's see. We'll give him a shot, though. This is Nick. Good, Nick. You going to read that?
Sure.
Is that the right one?
This is the Thursday night.
Oh, okay. You got to shoot from the hip.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Conscious Contact Speaker Group. My name is Mick. I'm an alcoholic. This meeting meets every Saturday night at 8:30 at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Doylestown, right across from the Dairy Queen. Our message here is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery. Through the working of 12 steps, big book, fellowship. If this is your first time here, we'd like to welcome any newcomers. Anybody want to raise your hands or start shouting out? Yes, sir.
Tom from New Haven, alcoholic.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom.
Pete.
What's up, Pete?
Pete.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Bill, alcoholic.
Hey, Bill. Welcome.
Roll alcoholic.
Rolling.
Don alcoholic.
All right.
Gino alcoholic.
Gino.
Go ahead, man. Yes.
Samuel, alcoholic.
Hey, Sam. Welcome.
Dan, alcoholic.
Hey, Dan. Welcome.
I'm John.
Jet alcoholic.
I'm John, alcoholic.
Hey, John.
Brian, alcoholic.
Hey, Brian. Welcome.
Hey, Brian, welcome.
I still can't believe I'm in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Excellent. Who's reading the? We have Joe to read the 12 steps.
Yep.
I'm gonna have Joe come up and read the 12 steps.
All right.
Woo!
All right.
My name's Joe, I'm an alcoholic. These are the 12 steps of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Thank you.
And again, my name's Ron. I'm an alcoholic, and there's important announcement that we have. This is 5/5/18, which is we bill it as CINCO de MAYO, but there's another kind of bittersweet anniversary. And if you guys have been to our meeting and ever heard Tim Michaels, he's passed now. He died last year. It's been 1 year as of today. A good friend of Alcoholics Anonymous, amazing member of the Conscious Contact Group, and just a great person in humanity that we're going to all miss. Kind of dedicating this whole thing to his presence and his life and what he has done. It's pretty amazing with that, and I hope you guys keep him in his prayers and his family, who have lost him very shortly due to a physical thing. But anyway, at this point, thanks.
Thanks, Ron.
So I guess we'll get down to the good stuff. Let me introduce Bill L. from Florida /Ohio
Bill.
Alcatraz, a couple other.
Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hey, Bill.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ron. A little short, but anyway, wow. where I come from, you're supposed to be in AA by 8:30, so we're going to have to hurry here a little bit. But I usually like to give a disclaimer. If you're new, I do not speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. If you aren't new, you already know that. And I'm going to share my experience, and there's a chance, there's a likelihood that some of you are going to disagree with what I say. And I just want to let you know that if that happens, you'd be wrong. Because, you see, it's my experience, and your experience may well be different, and that's fine, but it is my experience. So, my sobriety date is April 26, 1978. I don't say that to impress you, although it impresses me, because, before I met you, the longest I could stay sober was a couple of days. And my sobriety date is the most valuable thing I have, because without that I don't have anything else. I hope your sobriety date is the most valuable thing you have, because if it isn't, you'll give it away cheaply. And I know there's at least one Al-Anon here. There's probably more than that, so I'll make you feel at home. That's the Al-Anon salute. And I can say that because I've also been a member of Al-Anon since 1979. Al-Anon also has a handshake. Unfortunately, it's not secret. So, it'd probably be better. But that's enough of that. That's a different talk. And I'm a recovered alcoholic. And what that means is that I've taken all 12 steps, I've had a spiritual experience, the obsession to drink has been removed. I don't know where it went. Maybe one of you's got it, I ain't got it. And I haven't had for over 30 years. And I am sure that as long as I continue to work the steps, work with others, pray and meditate, it's not going to come back, and I will remain recovered. And I don't know about you, I'd much rather be recovered than recovering. That sounds like a terrible struggle to me, and that isn't the way that I was taught. Probably the only thing unique about my story is I'm the only speaker, for those of you that are historians, I'm the only speaker you'll probably ever hear who was arrested for drunken disorderly in the Mayflower Hotel in Akron. So that's my claim to fame. So I'm supposed to tell you a little bit about what I was like, what happened, what I'm like today. So we'll try and do that and get into AA here pretty quickly. I was born in Cleveland, in a middle-class family. I really believe there's a genetic component to this disease for most of us. I had an uncle that died of alcoholism. On my father's side, I had another uncle that was grossly obese, close kin to alcoholism. And it's just there. I think I was genetically set up for this. I don't know about you, but I believe that's true for me. I was sober 2 or 3 years before I remembered that when I was 3, 4 years old, my parents used to hide the cough syrup when I was a kid. And, well, back then it was good stuff, terpene hydrate and codeine and Cheracol. So some of you remember that, right? And I grew up, and I always, the couple of things I remember growing up is I always had this kind of free-floating anxiety. I was just a little scared all the time. And I have some ideas today as to what that was about, but it was just there. And I never felt like I belonged. Even when I belonged, I didn't feel like I belonged. And I've since heard the same thing from a whole lot of you. It seems to be common among us. I grew up in a church that I look back on today as Our Lady of Perpetual Guilt. And I used to apologize for that and say I heard it wrong, and then I got here and I found out that most of you had heard very much the same thing. They really were teaching that. That's changed somewhat these days, but so as you can see, I'm a kid, and I already have a heck of a program going. I'm scared, I'm isolated, and you know, and I'm not getting along with the church. And one of the things about this church is one of these places where you didn't even have to do anything. You know, all you had to do is think about it. And by the time I was about 12, I was thinking about it a lot. And I wasn't sure what I was thinking about. I hadn't done anything yet. And the more I tried to stop thinking about it, the more I thought about it. And I just knew that because I couldn't stop, I was damned and I was going to go to hell. So here I am, 12 years old, I'm scared, I'm isolated, and I've given up on God because I made a conscious decision at age 12, since I was going to go to hell anyway, that I was just going to do everything I could get away with. And fortunately, I was chicken, so there are a lot of things that I didn't do, but it was certainly not out of any virtue. Believe me, I just didn't want to get caught. I was afraid to get caught. So I don't know when I had my first drink. I know the first time I got drunk was when I was 16. I went to a New Year's Eve party. I'd managed to buy a bottle of JTS Brown. I'm not quite sure how I scored that, but I did. And that was for me. I had no intentions of sharing any of it. Not exactly normal drinking for a 16-year-old. And that night, I don't know how much of it I drank. I drank a lot. I drank enough to black out. You know, and somewhere in the midst of that feeling of anxiety went away, and I felt like I belonged, and I thought I had found the secret to life. And after that, I drank as much as I could, as often as I could, which is, when you're 16, 17, isn't always easy, but that's what I tried to do. And I went off to college and managed to flunk out within 2 years as a direct result of drinking, and then I went off to the Army with 2/5 in the bottom of my duffel bag. Not exactly normal drinking, right? Didn't flunk out of the Army, but... And so I finally wound up that I'm living in Canton, Ohio, and I'm running a sales office. For a few months, I was the youngest sales manager this company had, till they hired somebody younger, and I feel like I'm on a good track. And anyway, I had this guy working for me by the name of Tom. Tom was my employee. At least on paper, he was my employee. Because, you see, Tom never showed up on Monday or Friday. And he had a wife in Baltimore and a girlfriend in Canton, and he was messing around with every woman in the office. I wanted what he had. He used to park his car 3 blocks from the office, because if they found it, they were going to repossess it. And I got a lot of phone calls for him from people whose last names ended in vowels. You get the picture. And this was the guy that took me to my first AA meeting. He was sober 12 years at the time. And he could see what was going on. I couldn't see. I went completely out of curiosity. That was it. No other reason. And I still remember it was this church basement in Canton, Ohio. And back then, there was so much smoke you couldn't see the speaker. There's a few of you that remember that, you know, and I listened to this speaker. I did not relate with one word he said. I was the youngest person in the room, and at the end of the meeting, Tom said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think it's really great for those of you that need it." And he says, "Well, do you think you might be alcoholic?" I said, "I don't think so." He says, "Do you want to find out?" And I said, "Sure." And he handed me this test. Now, this one, every one of you here has taken one of those, 30, 40 questions, 20. Anyway, this one was 40 questions from the Cleveland Intergroup to determine whether or not you're an alcoholic. You know, so I took the test, I lied a little, well, more than a little, and I missed 7, which I thought might be a D, but it'd be a passing score, right? And at the bottom of this thing, it says if you answered yes to 2 or more of these, you are definitely alcoholic. and Tom said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think I might be a little bit alcoholic." And he said, "That's like being a little bit pregnant." When I came into AA much later, I took the test again. The second time I answered yes to 37 of them. A couple of years later, there was only one I couldn't say yes to, and I think it had something to do with drinking while you were pregnant. But other than that, so anyway. So what happened is, over the next several years, nothing happened. Everybody that I knew was doing stuff. They were going to school, and they were getting degrees, and they were getting better jobs, and they were getting married and starting families and buying homes, and none of that happened for me. I'm in the same place doing the same thing, and nothing has changed. made it really hard for me to identify with a lot of you when I got here, because I would sit and listen to people who talk about losing the house and the wife and the car and the job, and I never lost any of those things. I never had any of them. You know, I was listening to a bunch of has-beens, and I was a never was. You know what I mean? But Tom stayed in touch with me, and that turned out being an 11-year 12-step call. 11 years. He stayed in touch with me. He used to call me periodically, usually on Sunday morning, usually collect. You know, back in those days, the operator would come on and say, you know, do you accept the charges? And at 7 o'clock Sunday morning, and Tom, who initiated the call, on the other end says, yes, I will, operator. So now I'm paying for a collect call from him, and it's 7 o'clock Sunday morning. And he'd always start out the same way. He says, how are you feeling? Which is a terrible thing to ask one of us on a Sunday morning, you know. And I do not ever remember his mentioning AA again. But he stayed in touch. He stayed in touch. He stayed in touch. So 11 years later, nothing has happened, you know, and I'm in the same place doing the same things, and nothing seems to be working very well. Read the bedevilments in the book. I got all of those. Didn't know that's what they were called then. And I thought that, you know, maybe the thing that's wrong is I need to find a woman and get married. And you knew there'd be a woman involved somewhere, didn't you? Yeah, I mean, I was having some minor difficulties with women. And, I mean, you'd line up 10 pretty women and I could pick the sick one every time. And, you know, which when I came to AA was really cool because you had them all grouped here. And then I got to Al-Anon, but that's a different talk, okay? And, so I think everybody has this image of what the perfect mate would look like, and I met her. And she was absolutely stone cold gorgeous. She had done some modeling in New York and talented. She'd done some off-Broadway stuff. She was rich, and she had just gotten out of a mental hospital. Something about the last boyfriend was an alcoholic and a drug addict or something. And, you know, and I met her. We find each other, don't we? And I met her, and it was, man, this was it. This is the thing that was going to fix me. And we had this torrid affair, which lasted about 2 weeks, and she dumped me. And I was destroyed. I mean, I was just... Yeah, destroyed. I didn't know what to do. This is the thing that was going to save me, and I went on this binge, and I don't know how long it lasted, 2-3 weeks. I really don't know. And I'm in this motel room and up outside of Port Huron, Michigan, on the St. Clair River, and it's November, and I'm just drinking. I'm supposed to be working, but all I'm doing is drinking. And the only time I'm leaving the room is, you know, to get something else to drink and maybe a little something to eat, but not much. It's the only time I can leave the room. And the blinds are all drawn, you know, because I can't stand the light. And the TV's on because I can't take the silence. You know, and back in those days, they'd play the national anthem and the TV would go off at midnight, and I'm listening to static the rest of the night. But I can't, and I'm just scared. I'm just scared, and I can't get drunk, and I can't get sober, and I'm scared. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You know, just scared. And there's that river out there, and I'm thinking, you know, I could go out to the river, but it's cold. You know, and I might be willing to die, but I wasn't willing to suffer. You know. So this went on for a couple of weeks, and somewhere in the midst of all of this pain and angst, I asked this God I was no longer sure I believed in for help, and I got an answer. Now, I did not get the answer I expected. I had known from the time I was 17 that when I picked up the first drink or drug, I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew that. You know, I might be home in 2 hours, I might be home in 2 days or 2 weeks. I didn't know. I just didn't know, and that was okay. You know, that was a small price to pay. But now it was different, because see, now I couldn't control when I started. Before I couldn't control when I stopped. Now I can't control when I started. And I'm drinking in the morning, and I'm carrying a bottle around with me, and I'm showing up at work, and they're saying unkind things like, you smell bad? You know, because, well, you know how it is. You get busy, and sometimes you just don't have time to get home and shower before you got to be at work. and I'm scared, and the booze just isn't working anymore, and I think I'm going crazy because I can't remember anything. My short-term memory is gone, and I'm writing stuff down, and then I can't read what I wrote down, and I'm in trouble at work, and I wake up one Sunday morning, and my choice is either Fallsview, which is the mental hospital in Akron, or to do something else. And I thought, well, maybe my drinking might have something to do with this. I had never tried to quit before. I had never tried. The closest I came to it, there was one point where I thought that maybe I would cut down a little and smoke a lot of pot. And I don't know how that worked for any of you, but what happened was 6 months later, I was drinking as much as I was before, and I was no longer going to work. I just couldn't smoke dope and go to work. It just didn't make sense. So I woke up this Sunday morning and I thought maybe if I quit drinking I'll still go crazy, but maybe I can hang on to it a little bit longer, you know what I mean? And I decided not to drink, and I didn't drink Sunday, and I didn't drink Monday, and Tuesday night I was drunk, and I do not remember picking up the first drink. Don't remember. And I woke up the next morning, which was a Wednesday morning, and I called the guy I worked for, and I said, I'm going to go do something. He says, we don't care what you do, go do something, anything, right? And I walked into the old Arid Club in Akron, and actually I had walked in and out of there once a few months before. I think it was probably in a blackout because I don't remember much, but I knew I was there. This time when I walked in the door, there was a guy at the door, and he grabbed me and shook my hand, and he said, are you new? And I said, yes. He says, do you have a drinking problem? I said, oh, yeah. And he says, do you want to stop drinking? And with all the honesty I could muster, I said, no, that's the problem. I said, but I think I need to. See, it's not working anymore. There was no virtue in this point at quitting drinking, because it just wasn't working. And I was too tired to go find another drug, if you want to know the truth. I was just tired. And the guy says, you want to go to a meeting? And I said, yeah. Now, I knew two things when I walked into that club room that night. The first thing I knew was that AA worked because Tom was still sober. He now had 25 years. He lived in Pittsburgh. He had a wife in Baltimore and a girlfriend in Pittsburgh. I think they were still looking for the car. I don't know. And so I knew he was still sober, so I knew this worked. The other thing that I knew was you didn't have to be good in order for this to work. Because if I had thought you had to be good in order for this to work, I wouldn't even have tried because I had given up being good when I was 12. And there was no way I was going to be good at 32. So I went to that first meeting, which happened to be King's School, which meant nothing to me at the time. The speaker did not say one word I could relate to other than he would forget where he left his car. Everybody in the room was still a little older than me, it seemed like, and I thought anyway, after the meeting, somebody said, are you sick? And I said, no, little did I know. And he said, do you need to go to the hospital? I said, I don't think so. And they said, look, can you not drink and come back tomorrow night? And I said, I think I can do that. And that's what I started doing. It's exactly what I started doing. Now, I just had an anniversary last week where I celebrated 40 years. And anniversaries are a time for reflection sometimes. The annual ones are one thing, but there's something about the ones every 5 years that are a little bit different, 10, 15, 20. I don't know what it is, but this time what I've been thinking about for the last 2 or 3 weeks more than anything else are all the people that helped me. That's what comes to mind. We talk about it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a group to raise an alcoholic. So I think that's what I want to talk about tonight is a lot of these people that helped me. So my first spiritual advisor in AA was a 6'7" biker by the name of Jim. He was about 3 years sober, and he was one of the few people in the room that was a little younger than I was, and I remember I'm a few days sober, and he says, some people are going to have trouble with this God part. Are you going to have any trouble with it? I said, nah. By then I'd read the steps, and I decided I was just going to skip anything that had to do with God. Kind of hard. 6 out of the 12 steps talk about God or higher power, right? So I don't think I'll have any problem. He says, you need to pray. And I said, no, I don't think so. He says, look, you need to pray. I said, why? He says, if you want to stay sober, you have to pray. I said, who am I going to pray to? He says, if you don't have a higher power, use mine. And I looked at him, and at 3 years sober, he was still far crazier than I had ever thought about being. I mean, we got him when his motorcycle gang threw him out. He was too crazy for them, so AA got him, right? And I looked at him, true story, and I looked at him and I thought, if he has a higher power that'll keep him sober, maybe it'll work for me. And I said, okay, I can do that. I will pray to your higher power. He says, that's good. He says, here's what you do. You ask him to keep you sober in the morning. You thank him at night. You don't ask him for anything else. You don't talk about anything else. He needs no advice or direction from you. So, and that's what I started doing. That's what I started doing. Didn't believe in it at all, but I did it anyway. I hung around the club room a lot. And there was a guy in the club room by the name of Jim. Jim was just always there all day, and he was playing cards with the new guys, and he was playing dominoes with the new guys, and whist, and all of this stuff. He was an ex-Army DI, exactly what you picture, minus the hat. He'd retired. He no longer had the hat, but he was built like a fire plug. He was this crusty old SOB, and he was always there. And he talked to me all the time, It didn't dawn on me till later. The other old-timers were all in the other room playing poker. He was out here talking with the new guys every day, and he never went to meetings. A meeting would start and he would leave. I'm no kidding. And I asked him, I said, why don't you go to meetings? He said, oh, they're a waste of time. Let me tell you the rest of the story. I found out later his wife was the secretary at the intergroup office in Akron. Every time they got a 12-step call that nobody else would run, she'd call him. So there were days when he ran 2 or 3 12-step calls. So the 12-step call, that's back when we made house calls, guys. You know what I mean? And he took me on my first 12-step call. I was sober maybe 3 weeks. I'm sitting there, and he got a call. He says, are you free for a couple hours? I said, yeah. He says, get in the truck. We're going to make a 12-step call. And I said, well, I don't know about that. He says, you been on one yet? And I said, no. He says, how long you been here? I said, 3 weeks. He says, you haven't been on a 12-step call yet? Get in the truck. I'm not kidding. And yeah. About the same time, they gave me my first guy to work with. I found out he was the only one of the few people in the club room younger than me. I found out later everybody else there had tried working with no success. So they figured they had nothing to lose, and they gave him to me. And I didn't know. The only thing I knew was the first time he called me, I was in the middle of a fight with my girlfriend at the time, and he calls. And I know I got to take the call, so I call and I talk to him with whatever was bothering him at the time for 10, 15 minutes. I hang up the phone. I walk back. We've forgotten what we were fighting about. I thought, oh, that's how this works. And yeah. I don't know what it is. I gravitated toward the old-timers. If you've read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, I sat in meetings with all of those guys back in the late 70s and early 80s, except Clarence Snyder. He'd already moved to Florida. But I sat in the rooms with all of them. These are the people I went to meetings with. Meant nothing to me at the time. Means a lot to me now. And I knew them. These were my teachers. There was another, I gravitated toward the old timers. There's another old timer up in Michigan by the name of Andy Anderson, because I worked up there a lot. And Andy had been a delegate, and he was just like Jim. He was retired. And every time they couldn't find anybody to run a 12-step call, they'd call Andy. And he was typically running 1 or 2 of these every day. These were the people that taught me. And then I moved from Akron to Mansfield, Ohio, and my sponsor is a guy by the name of Emmy Burgess, same thing, retired guy. I used to think he was addled because he'd take on all of these commitments, he would call me and he says, I'm supposed to speak in 2 places tonight. I want you to take one of them. Yeah, right. He'd say, I really can't drive at night anymore. I found out later he could if he wanted to, but he never drove. He would get somebody to pick him up, okay? He'd say, I got a 12-step call and I can't take it. Will you run it? And that's what he did. And he sponsored probably half the guys in town. And this is the way that I was taught. This was an action program. This is what I needed to do. I also got really involved with Young People's AA pretty early on. That's where I met my sponsor, who's here today. I've been at a Young People's Conference about 40 years ago almost. We really were young once, right? Icky. Somebody.
Iggy Pop.
You're supposed to answer pa. Nobody here. Okay, I went to a bunch of those. I'm amazed. I really am. I went to Boston. We were sober in 1985, and I've had every job in AA at one time or another, most of which I didn't want to have. I really didn't. What they told me was you don't get a choice. You just get a choice that either you're going to do the deal or you aren't. And once you decide you're going to do the deal, then you do whatever's put in front of you. I remember I'm living in Mansfield, and Mansfield Reformatory is there. If you've ever seen The Shawshank Redemption, that's where they filmed it. And that movie made the place look good. I mean, this was a really bad place. And there were some guys from Cleveland bringing in a meeting once a week, 60 miles away. And one of the guys said, sometimes in the winter it's tough for us to get here. Is there somebody who will help us out? And I raised my hand and I said, I will. 2 days later, I want out of this. I thought, what have I done? This is not part of my story. I don't want to go into this place. And I called my sponsor. I said, Emmy, I volunteered to do this prison meeting. I really don't think that I should do it. It's not part of my story. I said, what do you think? He says, I started that meeting in 1959. Took care of that excuse. And I wound up doing that meeting for 2.5 years until I moved away. And actually, we wound up doing 2 meetings a week there. And I've had every job in AA that you can have, up to the intergroup level. And most of them are, the interesting thing is you get a job here, and I don't know about you, I never wanted to do it. I didn't think I was qualified. Somebody else could do it better. It was too much trouble, right? And so you take it anyway. And then a year later, you think, this is okay. And they say, nope, they take it away from you. And then you got to go do something else you don't want to do. I remember I went on the intergroup board in Columbus, and we didn't like what they were doing. Some of you can relate to that. We didn't like the board, right? And then somebody said, well, if you don't like what they're doing, why don't you get on the board? And I said, I don't know. He says, you want to trust AA to them? I said, okay. So it was a 17-person board. There were 7 people up for election. 7 of us agreed to run. We figured with 7 of us, maybe we could make some change, right? By the time they got to the election, there were 3 of us left. 3 of us were elected. 1 of them never showed up for the first meeting. My buddy Pat went twice, and he says, that's enough of this, I'm done. So I'm the only one left. And I called my sponsor, and I said, I don't want to do this. We aren't going to get anything done. He says, you don't understand. You made a 2-year commitment. You're going to do this whether you want to or not. So for the next 2 years, every board meeting, the vote was 16-1, 15-2, but I was there and I had a voice. And anyway, so most of what I've done here is stuff I didn't want to do initially. And if you're new, how much time I got? How am I doing?
You got another 30 minutes.
Well, we may not need quite that long. Let me tell you a couple other stories that are important. If there's anybody new here, I was sober maybe 3 months, and I was bouncing off of walls. I was stark raving sober, you know what I mean? And but by then I had just a modicum of sense, not much. So I went to my Tuesday morning meeting, and I grabbed the 2 smartest guys I knew, the 2 Bobs. And the one Bob was a Catholic priest who was about 5 years sober, who was working as an alcoholism counselor. The other one, Bob Bell, was a chemistry professor by profession. He had a really interesting story. He'd been in the Oxford groups, gotten sober in like 1942. He was a chemistry professor at Kent State University, stayed sober up until the riots. And with 71, went out to California, became one of the biggest drug manufacturers on the West Coast till he bottomed out and came back. And when I met him, when I met him, he was about 4 years sober, and he was running the primary detox in Akron. So I'm crazy, and I show up at this meeting. I say to these guys, I said, will you go to lunch with me? I said, I want to talk with you. And they said, yeah. And I went to lunch, and I explained to them how I'm having all of these problems, and nothing is working right, and nothing feels quite right, and it just isn't good. And okay. So they asked me a couple of things. They said, well, first off, how long have you been sober? And I told them. They said, what are you coming off of? And I told them. And they said, well, he says, it's to be expected. He says, what you've been doing for as long as you've been doing it, it's going to take a year or two before it really clears up. So get used to it. Your emotions are going to go up and down. They now call it post-acute withdrawal. Just get used to it. It's not a big deal. But if you don't drink, you never have to go through it again. That sounded like a pretty good deal. I'd never thought that before, And then they said things like, I complained about not sleeping. They said, how much coffee you drink? I said, well, about a quart a day. And they said, well, you might want to stop drinking coffee at 11 o'clock at night. You might sleep better. And what are you eating? And I was on the basic food groups back then, which was grease and chocolate and sugar and, you know what I mean? A lot of French fries. And they said, look, you might want to eat a vegetable once in a while, and take some vitamins. Take some vitamins. And we used to talk about this stuff, and that's what I started doing. And I just didn't feel well. Actually, what I was going to do that day, I was going to resign from AA. I really was, and I was going to tell them that I just didn't think this was going to work for me because I was just too sensitive. And one of them looked at me, and in my memory it was the priest. And what he said was, you aren't sensitive, you're just a touchy SOB. You hurt my feelings. And then one of them sat me down, sat there and said, he says, look, I'm going to tell you how this deal works. And if you don't hear anything else tonight, if you're new, please listen to this, because it saved my life. He says, I'm going to tell you how this deal works. He says, up till now, you've had a feeling, and then you acted upon the feeling, and then you rationalized your action. I said, well, yeah. I mean, is there any other way to live? And he says, no. He says, we don't do that here. He says, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some very specific actions to take. And based upon those actions, and only based upon those actions, your thinking will begin to change. I said, I don't believe you. They said, see? I said, okay. And if you do it long enough, eventually your feelings will change. And I heard that. And I am here to tell you, the first 5 years I was sober, everything you told me to do, I didn't want to do. I just didn't want to do it. I don't know about you. I didn't want to do it. I thought it was for somebody else, or somebody else could do it better, and maybe you need to do it, but I didn't. But I did it anyway because of what they told me. And somewhere around the 5th year, it began to be okay to do this stuff. They'd ask me to do something. I think, all right, this is all right. I can do that, but it still didn't feel right. Then somewhere around the 7th or 8th year, the feelings became congruent. And I'll tell you the proof of that. See, I don't know about you, but I had these voices in my head that would argue. Some of you had that? Yeah, I counted them once, and there were 7 of them. Okay? Now, if there'd only been 2, it would be no big deal. You flip a coin and just do it. But there were 7. And they'd argue, and they didn't like you. And they certainly didn't like me. They really didn't like anybody. And they just argue and argue and argue and argue. But what began to happen is the voices began to drop off. Until it got to be around 7 years, and most of the time there was only one voice. And it was consistent. And it liked me. And it liked you. But if at any point along the way I had decided I wasn't going to do what you told me to do because it didn't feel right, or I didn't think it was for me, I would have been in real trouble. Okay, so if you don't think this is for you and it doesn't feel right, you're in the right place.
That's good.
Yeah, and unless you want to keep the voices, I mean, that's up to you too. So I'm going to tell some stories about people. One of the people I was in, because this is what's been on my mind the last couple of weeks. One of the guys who was involved in starting Young People's in Columbus, Ohio, was a guy by the name of Jeff. And Jeff came to us when he was about 19. He was one of these kids, he'd been a high school athlete, good-looking kid. The women loved him. He just couldn't stay sober. You know what I mean? He'd get a few months and he'd go back out, and he'd come back, and he'd get a few months and he'd go back out. He stuck around long enough to start Young People's AA, but everybody in town loved the guy, and everybody worked with him, you know. He had some coexisting mental health issues that were pretty severe. And finally, at about 9 years in and out of here, you know, he OD'd one night and died, probably intentionally. Okay, now the point that I'm trying, well, two things. First off, today, what he had could probably have been treated. Okay, then it couldn't. They didn't have the right stuff. They didn't know what they were doing. It's highly treatable today. You know, the other thing is, I remember after the funeral, and most of you have been to a funeral like this, after the funeral, we're hanging around, we're talking, and you know, was there anything else we could have said? Was there anything else we could have done? You know, you've had those conversations, haven't you? Mm-hmm. You know, is there something else? Anything else we could? And we finally came to the conclusion there really wasn't. We had done the best we could. He just had a disease that we aren't equipped to handle here. You know, we do real well with alcoholism. We don't do real well with crazy. You know, we just don't. You know, the biggest thing, though, that came out of that is I made up my mind that I was never going to go to another one of those funerals and wonder if there was something else I could have said or I could have done. And I haven't. You know, which means I am not the most popular guy in town because I'm going to tell you what I think. You know, I would rather step on your toes than stand on your grave. You know, and the other thing that came out of that experience, I seem to get a lot of people that have mental health issues. And I've got one in Ohio now by the name of Dawn. Dawn she's going to have 12 years shortly. She says something that is really profound. She has some severe mental health stuff. What she says is, she says, any day I choose not to take my medication, I've made a decision to relapse. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but it's coming. It is coming, you know. We don't treat that here. There are other people that do. You know, we can get them sober. We can't necessarily get them safe. So that's one of the things that happened. Another thing that happened, I'm about 20 years sober. I'm living in Columbus. And, I'm 20 years sober. I'm working with a lot of guys. Most of them have double-digit sobriety. Yeah, I'm really not working with a lot of new people. You know what I mean? You know, most of the guys I was working with were like Eric, and Eric at that time had 9 years sober. He did 3 hospital meetings a week. He had been doing that for 6 years. 3 hospital meetings a week for 6 years. The point is, this is not a guy that needs very much sponsoring. You know what I mean? He's doing the right stuff. And all of the others were pretty much like him. They were doing the right stuff. And I just wasn't really working with anybody new. And I sure wasn't standing at the door with my hand out greeting newcomers. I just wasn't. You know, this bothered me. I mean, this is not what I was taught to do. You know, that isn't what Jim and Andy taught me to do. You know, and Emmy, that isn't what they taught me to do. And I inventoried it. I'll tell you what I came up with. It was too hard. Too difficult. When I got here, you know, it was just like it says in the preface to the second edition. 50% of the people stayed sober from the get-go. Half of what was left stayed sober after 1 or 2 short relapses. That's exactly what my first home group was like. 50% of them had never had a drink since their first meeting. Half of what's left got sober within a few months and just stayed sober, you know. And I remember, this is 40 people met every Thursday morning. Yeah, Kathy and I were the 2 new ones. After 6 months, Kathy drank. She was back in a couple of weeks, but everybody was horrified. Because see, in 6 months out of the 40 people that met every week, she was the only one that drank. You know, certainly not what was happening 20 years later, you know. Certainly weren't getting 50%, 75%. You know, pick a number. 10%, 20%. Certainly wasn't 50%, you know, and what the problem was, it was too hard. It was just too hard. When you're losing 8 out of 10 of them or 9 out of 10 of them, you can't do this over and over and over again. It's just too painful. Some of you relate to that, right? It's just too hard. It is just too hard. You know, and about that time I ran into some people and what they were doing was they were taking people through the steps quickly. And that's what I started doing. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And that's been the deal I've had with people for about the last 20 years. I'll work with anybody. We're going to take the steps, all of them, within the next 30 days. If you aren't willing to do that, I'm not willing to work with you because I don't have anything for you. I really don't. I have nothing for you other than that, ultimately. Nothing. Nothing. And when I say 30 days, that's a lie because I'm retired. And we're going to get together in the next 3 or 4 days and work. And that's what I do. And something amazing has happened for the last 20 years. Better than half the people I've worked with have stayed sober. How about that? Now 12-step work is fun again. You know what I mean? When they're making it and you get to watch people change before your eyes, if you're here, I got to tell you, the best part of this whole, you think it's a thrill to get a coin? Wait till you get to give one. Wait till you get to give one. That's the best part of this whole deal. When you're sitting eyeball to eyeball with somebody across the table and all of a sudden you see the lights go on, that's the best drug I've ever had, because you've been a part of really helping somebody's life. So that's what I do now, and I get to work with a lot of people. And part of it is selfish, because one of the things that happens when I get you through the steps quickly, you don't call me at 2 in the morning wanting to drink. I get to sleep. You call me at 2 in the afternoon asking how to work with the next one, which is what is supposed to happen here. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I had a guy come up to me. A couple quick stories. I had a guy come up to me after a meeting, I don't know, a few months ago, and he says, "Don't you ever talk about anything other than the steps?" And I said, "Is there anything else?" And he looked at me. I'm not always popular where I go. I had another guy come up to me after a meeting. It was about a year ago. He comes up to me, he says, I just spent $60,000 on treatment, and you're telling me the only thing you have for me is prayer? And I said, pretty much. He was not happy. I have not seen him again. But, am I going to lie to him? You know what I mean? So there's this guy lying in the middle of the road, all bloody and bruised, and one leg is going this way, and an arm's going that way, and he's just lying there in this pool of blood, and he's a mess. And this AA member comes by, good AA member. And he comes running up and he says, "Buddy," he says, "can I help you?" He says, "Yeah, man." He says, "Call an ambulance. I got hit by a truck." The AA member says, "Okay." He says, "What color was the truck?" He says, "Well, it was red." He says, "I'm sorry. We only help people that were run over by blue trucks." The point is, my friend John died in a VA hospital about 2 years ago of old age. John was a good AA member. He'd been an AA member for over 30 years. He worked in the VA system. He helped literally thousands of alcoholics and addicts during that 30 years. Solid AA member. And John used to say something really profound every time he spoke. I'm beginning to run out of voice. I've been doing this all day. Anyway, yeah. John used to say something really profound. He'd get up there and he says, "My name's John and I'm an alcoholic. And I found the cure to alcoholism before I got here. Heroin." He came to us off a 3-year heroin run. Don't twist this. He was an alcoholic. He came to us off a 3-year heroin run. Most of the people, that means better than half of the people that I've worked with over the last 15 or 20 years, came to me with something that looked like something other than alcoholism. They were shooting heroin, they were popping pills, they were doing whatever, okay? They were alcoholics. Don't get me wrong, they're alcoholics. I got a guy right now, he's going to celebrate 5 years here very shortly. He was living in the park putting needles in his arm. He's going to graduate, Fred, he's going to graduate from nursing school here shortly with a bachelor's degree. Fred wanted no part of any of us. I took him to NA, but I also brought him here. He didn't like us. He really didn't like us. He was sober and clean for about 2 years when he remembered that the 6 months he drank when he was 16 before he found heroin he was a blackout drinker. And of course, his father was an alcoholic. He's one of us. He's absolutely one of us. Just didn't appear that way right at the beginning. You know, I think what I'm trying to say is we need to be really careful, you know, to not let our singleness of purpose destroy our primary purpose. You know, it's like the service work I've done. I don't get to choose what to do. I only get to make the choice to do it. I don't really get to choose who I work with. I just make a choice to work with people, and then I work with whoever's put in front of me. You know, and I don't qualify them other than the fact, are you willing to stop? You know, do you want to stop? You know, even if you haven't yet, I don't care, but do you want to stop? That's the only requirement that I know of. That, and you're willing to sit down and do the work. You got to be willing to do the work, you know. So, I don't know how much time I have left. I'm beginning to run out. 10 minutes? Okay. My life has been really good. You know, I've been married and divorced twice. I've got...
Yeah.
That's usually a low number in this crowd. I've got a son who's 38 years old. He's a school teacher in Columbus, Ohio. He's doing good. His mother was not an alcoholic or addict. He doesn't seem to be one of us. I have a daughter from my second wife. She died 9 years clean and sober of addiction. She couldn't quit smoking. She had a disease. Her father had the same thing. When she'd light a cigarette and smoke, her breathing would shut down. At the end, she would light a cigarette and call the squad. You know, the last time she went in the hospital, she didn't come out. So she died when my daughter was 7. I've been a single parent ever since. My daughter's now 27. You know, she's also a black belt Al-Anon. You know, after her mother died, you know, I don't know what to do with this kid. I took her to therapists. They didn't know what to do. So finally I said, I'm going to take her to Alateen. You know, she's a little young, but I'm going to take her. And I did. And I made a deal with her. I said, you go to Alateen, we get ice cream afterward. You know, she was the youngest kid in the group for about a week. Yeah, and then my friend Pat came to me. He says, I don't know what to do with Sarah. He says, I don't know whether to save for a legal defense fund or a college fund. I could go either way. So her friend Sarah came, and Iris told her, he said, the deal is you get ice cream. You know, so if you got kids, if there's anything that's a help or prevention for this disease, that's it, guys. That is absolute. Why would we not give to our kids what we have? Unless maybe you don't quite believe yet what you have. Just maybe. That also may be the reason you're not working with others. If you don't quite believe what you have, you know, get with somebody. Find out what we really have here. So she's a black belt Al-Anon. She took the steps the first time when she was 11 with a sponsor.
Wow.
She spoke at a convention when she was 12. She used to tell the kids at Alateen, now she tells the Al-Anons, she says, how hard can these steps be? They were written for alcoholics. She's got a point. You know, she's 27 now. She does not seem to be an alcoholic or an addict. She does have some rather profound mental health issues that she's really doing well with. You know, she's also admin for an Al-Anon group online with 37,000 members. Al-Anon. Now, the reason that I talk about this, okay, is the fact that, you know, I love AA, but the truth is everything isn't wonderful out here in AA land all the time. I mean, it really isn't. 65,000 overdoses last year, another 85,000 dead of alcoholism between accidents and cirrhosis and all the rest of it. The sad thing is, most of those people, meaning better than half, were in a 12-step meeting within the last year. That's true. We had them. We couldn't keep them. You know? We couldn't keep them. Bill Wilson said in 1943, our chief obligation to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program. You know, probably not at this group, but a whole lot of them. No, wait a minute. What I'm going to say is probably doesn't happen here. Okay, but a lot of the meetings I go to, all the newcomer gets is a white chip and maybe a phone list and keep coming back. keep coming back is not an adequate presentation of the program. Just don't drink. Are you kidding me? That's the dumbest thing we tell people. If I could just not drink, why would I come here? I mean, really. I don't know about you. I tried that before I got here. Didn't work. I come here and you're telling me now it's going to work because I plant my butt in the seat? You know, so anyway, 37,000 people in this Al-Anon Facebook group online. They have over 30 meetings a week. The interesting thing about that is Al-Anon does census the same way AA does every few years. The average age of Al-Anon members nationwide in the last census was 64. And her Al-Anon group online, it's 37, almost 30 years younger. The point is, I don't know what this is all going to look like in another 20, 30 years. I'm not going to be here. Most of you will. But I do know that we really have to become more creative, in carrying the message. What they're doing works. 30 meetings a week. They're sponsoring online. They do a step workshop about twice a month. It is absolutely working. This deal works. It works. It works. It works. Okay? And somehow we need to be getting across the message that it really does work, because, treatment is telling them they have a 3% chance, and they're about right when they come out of treatment. Okay, but if you're here and you do the work, my experience has been in almost 40 years here, I have never seen anybody take all 12 steps and stay to share the experience that has relapsed. Never. But you got to do both. You got to take all 12 steps. You have to stay to share the experience. If you got something else that works, go do it. But if you're here, this is what we need to be talking about. And we need to get more creative in the ways that we carry the message. You know what I mean? I'll tell you, I work with a lot of people, and especially the young ones come in, and you wonder why they don't come back. I'll tell you why they don't want to come back. They're sitting in these open disgusting meetings. Did I say that out loud? Yeah. They're sitting in these open disgusting meetings, and they're tired of listening to you talk about your stupid relationship one more time. They're tired of hearing about the boss you don't like. They're tired of hearing all the rest of this stuff. This deal works when we stick to the program, which is the 12 steps. We really don't have anything else to offer. So... yeah, I probably stepped on somebody's toes.
Step away.
I'm not going to stand on your grave without telling you the truth. So anyway, I'm married and divorced twice. I got to retire in Florida 8 years ago. Haven't cut my hair since then. I haven't had to. Paul invited me up here to do a step workshop. That's why I'm here. He told me I had to come here and wear a white shirt and tie. I had a tie, but I didn't have a white shirt. He loaned me one. I haven't put on a dress shirt in 8 years. I love it. I don't like putting on long pants. I have kind of a resentment about that today. I don't know. My life is good. It is so good. I got a little 700 square foot apartment, which is perfect because I can't buy anything because I don't have any place to put anything else. I got a car that's paid for. It's paid for. And I'll tell you what, I may be the only one here that has a car that has both a tape deck and a CD player. And it's big enough to put 4 other people in to take them to a meeting, which is probably the most important thing. And I have enough money to last me the rest of my life as long as I die by Thursday. I get to live in a place. I used to save my money all year to go there for 1 week, and I get to live there. I absolutely love it. Life is really, really good. But it's only good because I came here and I did what you guys told me to do, the things that I didn't want to do, that I didn't feel like I needed to do, that didn't feel right, but I did them anyway because I found somebody I trusted enough to do it anyway. So, I think I'm done. I think I've about finished. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
thank Bill one more time. And the most important, Paulie D from Connecticut, who drove him down. Thank you.
Yeah, Paul.
Pretty amazing the amount of logistics that go into this stuff. You know, we got a guy from Ohio living in Florida, speaking in Connecticut, and then traveling down to Doylestown. How does this work, right? Okay, really important. We do these things like a few times a year. Please get on our Facebook page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. Watch the stuff. We always like moving around doing things, and if you connect with that, we also have a website page. Just go to Google, type in Saturday night 1 hour speaker meeting, AA Doylestown, 8:30 p.m. whatever. You'll find it, and it has all the stuff listed, easy to find. Now we got a 50-50 raffle. I think Drew. What happened was Drew compiled that and collected it. He pulled the ticket while he was talking. He won. So you can anyway, he's gonna come over here and pick a ticket and do that. Please be mindful to thank our speaker. Take some time out to thank him and help us clean up this mess so we can actually use this venue one more time in the future.
Pull the number.
Oh, me? I'm not pulling the number. Bill? Anybody trust Bill? Get Bill.
I don't have a ticket.
Hey, oh, you don't?
Well, I was a winner before the drawing. Why would I, you know, if I buy a ticket and go either way?
There you go. Here it comes.
Last three numbers. 990.
What is it?
990. Last three numbers.
990. 990.
Last three numbers.